So, hello Trebor, thank you very much for this short interview for the Bertinoro's Days on civil economy. So, let's start with some questions. How is growing the platform COP in the world right now, the movement, and how you see it?
Well, I think this is a cooperative moment, right? Where in the United States you have half of all people unemployed, right? And I think in Spain and in numbers, I think they project 20% unemployment, probably similar in Italy and many other countries. So, you know, one of the greatest economic downfalls since the 1930s. And this is exactly when cooperatives thrive, usually, historically. And so this is, I think, also then for the, if you take that as one factor and then as a second, you take the shift of everything to digital platforms, that, you know, also you see that in Italy, where people were maybe reluctant to join digital platforms before, now they had to. Right, and it so happens that in that process you also support a sort of American colonialism, essentially, right? Like data colonialism, where big American tech companies, right, really get much more power also in Italy because of the number of data that they collect that can only really be compared to the power that cities before had, right, over those data. And so this is, I think, is really helping platform co-ops. There has been a lot of momentum. You know, we see some, 500 platform co-ops or so emerge all over the world. However, right, we also see only very few that actually really get to scale. Right. So, and this is, I think, the question, right? Like, how can you scale this and really affect 10, 12 million people, you know, for example? Mm-hmm. I think, like, one of the best examples there is really smart.coop, I think, in Belgium. It's a really interesting and fantastic, practical, intelligent, creative, innovative example. Where the co-op structure really brings social benefits to freelancers. And overall, I think what we need to shoot for is to really create a mass movement, right, that brings together, that breaks out of this balkanization that I know is very typical also in Italy, but also in Germany and in France and in many countries. Where, you know, these groups stay very isolated, right? The co-ops stay isolated. So, like, to really bring, like, the unions together with all the other stakeholders, with the cooperatives, with the city, with the municipality, with, you know, other social movements against, I don't know, in the United States here, police violence and all of these things.
Okay.
Political movements, I think that's the way to go, right? It's like to really bring those actors together and also create a global ecosystem that can inform each other, where open source software can be shared, where data standards can be shared, where you can create mutual benefit globally. You know?
So I think you partially answered some of the questions that I would like to ask you, but like, what are, in your opinion, like the main obstacles right now, both at a level of the single platform co-ops, but in general more for the movement?
Well, I think funding is without a question the biggest problem. Well, funding and then also, I guess, social cohesion, or like a sense of figuring out governance, right? So I think, like, there's this idea that, you know, cooperatives are like one worker, one vote, which is true. But I think what also needs to be clear is that there does need to be leadership, right? There needs to be a person that sort of leads these cooperatives. And there needs to be space for that in some way. So I think to rethink how leadership works in cooperative and how governance works is really important. We have some inroads with thinking about how to bring funding to these projects. One would be like an investment fund, which I think Start.coop is just about to launch, but not in an unproblematic way. You know, I mean, this really needs to be money that is not controlled. So like where it really needs to be money that doesn't come with strings attached, and the Start.coop money will come with strings attached. And I don't know how this is in Italy, but in the US, there's this huge market, $1.3 trillion for social impact investing, right? So investors who basically say they only want to invest in ethical companies, right? Those turn out to be still corporations. So I think what should be done there is like a campaign that actually ridicules those social impact investors and says, like, you know, you call this ethical, you know, you call this social impact investing, you are investing in corporations and they are by default, you know, a negative force. So you should really invest in co-ops, right? So, and even if even 1% of the social impact investing would go to co-ops, this would hugely change the landscape, right? Mm. And then, yeah, I mean, we just need to, and I think what is really important is organizations, right? So we saw this with Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Cortez here in the US, which, so like a really far left movement, well, far left, asking for democracy, like something along the lines of Germany, right? Like very radical, right? Very, very radical. It's not very radical, but so, you know, like Bernie Sanders is essentially asking for Denmark, right? Denmark type capitalism, right? But it didn't really go very far. And this is not really like a revolutionary moment or like the moment for an insurrection, because there aren't these institutions that can support that. I think institutions are incredibly important, and social movements as well, right? Where like this anger and the frustration and the dissent, right, is somehow anchored in places where there is follow through, right? So just look at Minneapolis, right, where George Floyd was killed. So, you know, like thousands of people ask to defund the police, right? And then there were all these meetings, you know, but then life kicks in, right? People have jobs, they have to work, they have children, right? So they can't do this full time, right? And so over even a matter of weeks, it all sort of dissolved, and the police is not defunded. And just people don't have the energy to pursue this, right? So if you would have an institution, an organization that is funded, which would carry this agenda forward, then you could try to translate that into policy and really defund the police, for example, or build cooperatives or whatever you want to do. But like, I think these institutions are really important. And that's why I think also the PCC is so important, right? Like to have an organization that can, or have many organizations, but, you know, PCC being one of them, that that sort of anchors that, you know, and pushes for it with policymakers, and has the energy and the time, right, to actually do that.
Okay, thank you. So just maybe in a couple of sentences, what we can do to accelerate this process and what we can expect in the coming year.
I think for a place like Bologna, and linking this to your idea of Co-op Valley, I think is really important, right? So you know this this report from Barcelona, which you know turned Barcelona into this example, right? That a city would really do something differently, right? In terms of data collection, in terms of how it treats these big corporations, etc. This hasn't all been implemented on the ground. So if you go to Barcelona and you talk to people, they, you know, like it's not all in place. But it has set an example all over the world, like in 60, 70 cities, right? Like they're all aspiring to be Barcelona, right? So symbolically, right, like it's very important what it looks like on paper, even if the reality isn't perfect, which it never is, right? But to set this example, right, and say like, this is how we are doing it, right? and set these values and provide a narrative, right, that is different.
Thank you very much, Dan Trebor, for your time. Thank you.
Sure.